The last thing Emily Carter did was wave, small fingers fluttering in the porch light, as if nothing in the world could possibly reach her on a street where everyone knew her name. Maple Grove was the kind of neighborhood that breathed easy. Lawns were trimmed, porch swings creaked softly, and the air in early evening carried the smell of cut grass and dinner drifting through open kitchen windows. Parents spoke across fences. Dogs barked once or twice, more out of habit than alarm. Kids rode bikes in lazy circles until the streetlights began to blink awake. Emily was 6, bright-eyed, quick to laugh, the sort of child who collected dandelions like they were treasure. She lived with her mother, Sarah, and her older brother, Noah, in a small house near the corner. Sarah worked long shifts at a local clinic, and Maple Grove helped fill the gaps the way close-knit places sometimes do, neighbors checking in, an extra snack offered, a gentle reminder to wear a jacket. That evening, Sarah had finally made it home before dark. The day had been heavy, her shoulders tight as she kicked off her shoes and tried to shake work from her bones. Emily, still wearing a smudge of marker on her hand from school, bounced at her side with one question after another. "Can I go outside? Just for a little bit?" Sarah hesitated. It was late enough that the sky had turned the color of bruised peaches, but not late. The sidewalk in front was visible from the living room window. Noah was on the couch with a game controller in his hands, half watching his sister like he'd done 100 times. 10 minutes, Sarah said, the words careful. Front yard only. If I call you, you come right back. Emily promised with the seriousness only children can manage, and she slipped out the door like a sparrow set free. For a while, everything stayed ordinary. Emily drew hopscotch squares with chalk near the curb. She chased a rolling tennis ball that had been lost for weeks. She waved at Mrs. Dalton, who watered her flower bed and called Emily, "Sweet pea," in a voice that always sounded like warm tea. Then a car turned onto the street, slow, unhurried, like it belonged there. It wasn't a flashy vehicle. Just a dark sedan, clean enough to look cared for, with the window down a few inches. The driver was a man the neighborhood had seen before. Daniel Harper. Mid-30s. Lived 2 streets over. Quiet. Polite. The kind of person who nodded hello at barbecues and kept his curtains drawn. 2 kids on bicycles slowed as the sedan rolled past them. Later, they would tell police that Emily didn't look scared. She stepped closer without hesitation, as if she recognized him. As if she trusted him. Daniel stopped near the curb. The engine stayed running. Emily leaned in toward the passenger side, and for a moment, the street noise seemed to hush, like Maple Grove itself held its breath. The door opened. Emily climbed inside. The sedan pulled away. And 10 minutes later, when Sarah opened the front door and called her daughter's name into the deepening dusk, the only thing that answered was the faint scrape of a bicycle tire somewhere down the block. "Emily?" Sarah called again, her voice lifting higher, sharper. Noah set down the controller, annoyance turning to confusion. He moved to the window, scanning the yard, the sidewalk, the chalk squares, now empty. Sarah stepped off the porch and looked up and down the street, expecting to see her daughter running back, hair bouncing, grin wide, late by a minute the way kids often are. But Emily didn't appear. And that was the moment Maple Grove began to change, when an ordinary evening cracked open, and fear slid into the space where safety used to live. Sarah's worry hardened quickly into panic. She walked the length of the sidewalk once, then again, calling Emily's name louder each time. Her voice began to shake, carrying farther than she intended. Doors along Maple Grove cracked open. A porch light flicked on. Mrs. Dalton stopped watering her flowers and frowned, hose dripping forgotten at her feet. "She was just out here," Sarah said, words tumbling over one another as neighbors gathered. "She was right here." Noah felt the fear settle in his stomach like a stone. He blamed himself immediately. He should have been watching, should have paused the game, should have noticed something. He ran up and down the street, checking behind hedges, peering into yards as if Emily might be hiding, waiting to jump out laughing. She didn't. Within minutes, someone suggested calling the police. Sarah's hands shook so badly she had to press the phone against her chest before dialing, as if steadying her heart would steady her fingers. She explained through broken sentences that her daughter was gone, 6 years old, brown hair, pink sneakers, last seen playing in front of their house. The response was swift. Patrol cars rolled in with lights flashing softly, not screaming yet, as officers fanned out through the neighborhood. They asked questions, wrote notes, knocked on doors. Volunteers began arriving almost immediately, people from nearby streets, church groups, parents who had tucked their own children into bed and then come back out into the night. Flashlights cut through bushes and along drainage ditches. Backyards were searched, garages checked, sheds opened. Someone brought coffee in large thermoses. Someone else brought blankets for Sarah, who stood rooted to her porch as if leaving it might somehow make Emily vanish for good. Witnesses came forward quickly. 2 children mentioned the car. A dark sedan. Slow-moving. They described the driver, a man with short hair, calm voice. Someone else remembered seeing Emily talk to him, leaning toward the open window. No one had thought it strange at the time. That detail would haunt them later. An officer asked gently, "Did Emily know many people around here?" Sarah nodded. "Most of them. This is home." The name came up before midnight. Daniel Harper. A few neighbors knew him only vaguely, quiet, kept to himself, worked irregular hours. Others recalled him helping carry groceries once, or fixing a fence without being asked. Nothing about him screamed danger. That, too, would become unbearable to remember. Police located his address and drove there that same night. His lights were off, but his car was parked in the driveway, still warm to the touch. When he answered the door, he appeared cooperative, even concerned. He said he'd been home all evening. Said he hadn't seen Emily. Officers noted the answers, the tone, the lack of visible alarm. They left with polite nods, but something lingered, a sense that the pieces weren't fitting cleanly together. By dawn, the search had grown massive. Dogs traced scents through the neighborhood. Drones buzzed overhead, scanning fields and wooded patches beyond Maple Grove. News vans arrived, their cameras angled toward the street where chalk squares still marked the place Emily had been playing. Sarah hadn't slept. She sat wrapped in a blanket, staring at the road, replaying every second of the evening in her mind, every choice, every permission granted, every moment she hadn't been looking. "Come back," she whispered to the empty street. "Please." But the sun rose anyway, pale and unforgiving, shining light on a neighborhood that no longer felt safe, and on a mystery that was already turning dark. By the second day, hope and dread existed side by side, neither willing to let go. Detectives retraced every known step of Emily's evening. They measured the distance from the Carter porch to the curb. They photographed chalk marks on the pavement like fragile artifacts from another life. Officers spoke to children at eye level, careful with their words, asking what they remembered about the car, the man, the moment Emily disappeared from view. The answers kept circling back to the same point. Daniel Harper. Investigators returned to his home, this time with sharper questions. Inside, the house felt oddly sterile, too clean, too controlled. Furniture sat in precise positions. There were no family photos on the walls, no clutter of ordinary living. Daniel repeated his story calmly, insisting he had been alone, insisting he had no idea what had happened to the girl. But small things began to stand out. A neighbor reported seeing his car leave late that night, then return hours later. Another mentioned smoke drifting briefly from his backyard well past midnight, dismissed at the time as someone burning trash. Detectives exchanged glances. Patterns were forming. Digital specialists were brought in. Devices were seized. What they uncovered painted a disturbing picture: years of hidden behavior, secret searches, encrypted files, and lies layered carefully on top of one another. Daniel's quiet life began to look less like solitude and more like concealment. Then came the evidence inside the house. Traces that shouldn't have been there. Marks that told a story without words. Tests confirmed what no one wanted to hear: Emily had been inside those walls, and she had not left alive. The search for a living child shifted into something colder, heavier. Officers removed their hats when speaking to Sarah. Voices softened. Words were chosen with painful care. Noah overheard fragments from the hallway and understood anyway. His childhood ended in that moment, the truth crashing in without mercy. Daniel was taken into custody quietly, without spectacle. He didn't resist. He didn't cry. Cameras captured his blank expression as he was led away, a face that would soon be burned into the memory of an entire town. As investigators continued, they discovered signs of an attempt to erase what had happened. Burned fragments. Destroyed materials. Efforts that spoke not of panic, but of calculation. Most of Emily was gone, taken from the world piece by piece, leaving her family with an absence that could never be filled. Maple Grove descended into collective mourning. Children were no longer allowed outside alone. Curtains stayed open at night. Parents checked locks twice, 3 times. Strangers were watched. Familiar faces were questioned. Trust, once given freely, was now rationed carefully. Sarah moved through her days like a ghost. Emily's room remained untouched, her shoes still by the door, her drawings taped proudly to the fridge. Some nights, Sarah swore she could hear her daughter's footsteps in the hallway, light and quick, before silence rushed back in. Daniel sat alone in a cell, the walls closing in, the evidence stacking higher by the hour. The story he would soon tell, that it had all been an accident, waited in the wings, thin and fragile against the weight of what had been found. And as the case moved toward court, one truth became impossible to escape. Emily had trusted the wrong person. And that trust had cost her everything. The courtroom was silent in a way that felt unnatural, as if even the air understood the weight of what was about to unfold. Daniel Harper sat at the defense table in a pressed shirt, hands folded neatly in front of him. He looked smaller there, stripped of the anonymity that once allowed him to blend into the background of Maple Grove. Across the room, Sarah Carter stared straight ahead, her face pale and unreadable, Noah beside her, shoulders tense, jaw clenched so tightly it ached. The trial began with the story everyone already knew: how a child had vanished from a safe street, how panic had spread, how hope had burned bright and then been extinguished. Prosecutors spoke carefully, laying out the timeline piece by piece, letting the facts form a path the jury could not avoid following. Witnesses took the stand. Children, now coached to speak clearly, described the dark sedan and the man inside it. Adults testified about the smoke, the late-night movements, the uneasy feeling that only made sense in hindsight. Investigators explained how evidence inside Daniel's home connected Emily to a place she should never have been. When digital specialists testified, the room seemed to grow colder. They spoke of hidden files, false identities, and a pattern of behavior that stretched back years, proof that what happened was not sudden, not random, not the result of a moment gone wrong. Then it was Daniel's turn. He claimed it had been an accident. His voice was steady as he described a version of events that painted him as unlucky, misunderstood, overwhelmed. He said Emily had panicked. He said he hadn't meant for anything to happen. He said fear drove him to make terrible choices afterward. The jury listened. Some took notes. Others watched him closely, searching his face for something: remorse, fear, truth. But the physical evidence told a different story. Experts explained why his account didn't match the marks, the timing, the attempts to erase what had been done. They spoke with precision, dismantling his explanation until it collapsed under its own weight. Sarah couldn't bring herself to look at him. She focused instead on the empty chair beside her, the space Emily should have filled, swinging her legs, whispering questions about the strange room and the serious people inside it. When closing arguments came, the prosecutor's voice cracked only once. "This was not an accident," she said. "It was a betrayal." The jury deliberated for hours that felt like days. When they returned, no one breathed. Guilty. On every count. Daniel showed little reaction as the verdict was read. No outburst. No tears. Just a slow blink, as if he were absorbing an inconvenience rather than the end of his freedom. The judge sentenced him to life without release. As the gavel fell, a sound echoed through the courtroom, not loud, but unmistakable. Sarah exhaled for the first time in weeks, a breath that carried grief, relief, and an ache that would never leave. Justice had been served, the law said. But nothing, no sentence, no verdict, could bring Emily home. After the verdict, the courtroom emptied slowly, as if no one quite knew where to go once the final word had been spoken. Reporters gathered outside, voices hushed but urgent, repeating details that now belonged to the public record. Headlines would call it justice. Commentators would analyze the sentence. Strangers would debate the case from a safe emotional distance. Inside Maple Grove, life tried to resume. Yellow ribbons appeared on trees along the street where Emily had last played. A small memorial grew near the Carter home, stuffed animals, hand-drawn cards, flowers that wilted and were replaced again and again. Children from the neighborhood added chalk drawings to the pavement, bright colors fighting against the memory of what had happened there. Sarah returned to work eventually, though returned wasn't quite the right word. She moved through her days with practiced politeness, smiling when expected, nodding when spoken to. At night, the quiet was unbearable. Emily's room stayed just as it had been, bed neatly made, favorite book on the pillow, nightlight still plugged in, glowing softly against the dark. Noah changed in ways that worried the adults around him. He grew older all at once. Loud laughter made him flinch. He insisted on walking Sarah to her car, even in daylight. Guilt clung to him like a shadow, an unspoken belief that if he had been watching more closely, if he had been better, his sister would still be there. Counselors came. Friends tried to help. But grief did not move in straight lines, and healing refused to follow a schedule. The absence of Emily's remains weighed heavily on everyone. Without them, there was no true goodbye, no final ritual to anchor the loss. Sarah sometimes imagined her daughter still waiting somewhere, cold or frightened, and the thought stole her breath until she had to sit down. In prison, Daniel Harper faded from public view. Appeals were discussed and dismissed. His name became shorthand for something unspeakable, a warning parents whispered when reminding children never to go with anyone, no matter how familiar they seemed. Maple Grove was quieter now. Parents stood closer to their kids at bus stops. Playdates were supervised. Doors were locked earlier. The sense of shared safety had been replaced by shared caution, an understanding that danger did not always look like danger. Yet, amid the sorrow, small acts of defiance appeared. A local park was renamed in Emily's memory. A fundraiser helped support child safety programs. Each spring, dandelions were planted along the sidewalks, bright, stubborn flowers that refused to disappear, no matter how often they were pulled. Sarah attended the dedication ceremony, holding Noah's hand tightly. When she spoke, her voice trembled but did not break. "My daughter trusted the world," she said. "I don't want fear to be the only thing we remember." The crowd stood in silence, many wiping their eyes, understanding that remembrance was now a responsibility they all carried. Emily's laughter no longer echoed through Maple Grove, but her story did, woven into the lives of everyone who had known her, and many who hadn't. And the town learned, painfully and permanently, that innocence, once lost, can never be fully restored, only honored. Years passed, but time did not smooth the edges of what had happened, it only taught people how to live around it. Maple Grove never fully returned to the way it had been before that evening. New families moved in, unaware at first of the street's history, until someone quietly mentioned Emily Carter and voices softened. Children grew up hearing her name like a lesson passed down, a reminder wrapped in caution and care. Sarah learned how to carry grief without letting it crush her. Some days were manageable, others stole the air from her lungs without warning. She found comfort in routine, in early mornings with coffee steaming between her hands, in watching Noah slowly build a life of his own. Noah left for college eventually. On the day he packed his car, he stood in Emily's doorway longer than necessary. He imagined who she might have been, what jokes she would have told, what dreams she would have chased. He promised her silently that he would live enough for both of them. The park bearing Emily's name became a place of quiet reflection. Wind moved gently through the trees. Children laughed there, their voices echoing like hope reborn, not careless but alive. Parents sat on benches, watching closely, loving fiercely. Once a year, on the anniversary of her disappearance, Sarah walked to the curb where the chalk drawings had faded long ago. She brought a single dandelion and laid it on the grass, its bright yellow standing stubborn against the earth. There were still questions, ones that would never be answered. Places unsearched. Moments unaccounted for. Goodbyes left unsaid. The lack of closure remained a wound that never fully healed. But there was also resolve. Emily's story changed people. It sharpened instincts. It reminded a town, and later a wider world, that trust must be paired with vigilance, and that safety is something built together, day by day. Daniel Harper would spend the rest of his life behind walls, his name slowly fading from headlines, from conversation, from relevance. But Emily's name endured, not as a warning alone, but as a memory of light, of laughter, of a childhood stolen too soon. In the end, Maple Grove learned a painful truth: evil does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it comes quietly, wearing familiarity like a disguise. And still, despite everything, the community chose to remember Emily not for how she was lost, but for how she lived. A little girl who waved goodbye one evening, believing she would be right back. And a world that has spent every day since wishing she had been.